Nadat mijn hoogbegaafde zoon met schooltrauma was uitgevallen op het basisonderwijs en hierdoor een van de duizenden thuiszitters werd die Nederland rijk is, verslond ik alles wat ik over hoogbegaafdheid kon vinden. Want hoewel hoogbegaafdheid heel veel mooie kanten kent, kunnen onze kinderen het toch soms knap lastig hebben. Uiteindelijk besloten wij als gezin dat wij de kennis en ervaringen die wij hadden opgedaan wilden delen met andere ouders en leerkrachten, zodat de reis voor hen iets makkelijker zou worden. We doen dit via het boek Een Intense Reis, maar ook via deze podcast, waarin deskundigen op het gebied van begaafdheid hun kennis delen, want samen komen we verder. Dit is Een Intense Reis, de podcast, en mijn naam is Marije Hoefland. Hi everyone, the following episode is in English again and it has been recorded via a Zoom call because I have a very special guest with me today from Colorado, USA. Today's guest has played a very important role in our journey. When I first started my search for information in order to better understand and help my gifted son who was dealing with explosive feelings, I was recommended the book Emotional Intensity in Gifted Students, Helping Kids Cope with Explosive Feelings. And at that moment, I hardly knew anything about what being gifted actually entailed. I just thought it meant having a high IQ, being a fast learner, having strong analytical skills, and therefore I did not really relate the problems that our son was having to him being gifted in any way. And when I read this book, I just cried. I finally understood what was going on, and understanding things better just made a world of difference. Instead of trying to find out what was wrong, we started searching for ways to empower him, strengthen his emotional skills, and make sure he also understood himself better. Today's guest is Christine Fonseca. Christine is an educational psychologist and author of many books on giftedness, trauma, and intensity, one of which is the book I have recommended in podcasts before, Emotional Intensity in Gifted Students, Helping Kids Cope with Explosive Feelings. And besides being very knowledgeable about the subject, Christine is also a wonderful human being. Whenever I would have questions or wanted to know something because I was researching a subject, I could always send her a message and she was always so quick to respond. Welcome, Christine. I'm so glad to have you on my podcast today.
I'm so glad the book has been helpful to you.
Oh, it's been, like I said, it's been the most helpful book. I felt like I was obsessed at that time because I was reading like book after book after book, just trying to get the puzzle together and finding the right things that I needed in order to help my son and to find out what was going on and how I could best support him and everything. But I felt like every book I read just didn't provide me with the answers. And finally, when I was reading your book, it just all came together. I was just crying. I'm like, oh my God, this is a part of him. There's nothing wrong with him. We just need to make sure that he gets whatever he needs.
Exactly. That's the whole reason I wrote the book, because I felt like families like yours didn't understand kind of that full picture of what it means to be gifted. And so they didn't understand that some of these social emotional things that they were seeing were actually just a feature of giftedness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you hardly read anything about it because at first you follow like all the people who are in the lives of your child. So the people in the education system and the people in the like health support system, but they don't know. So
That's right.
They never tell you that this is something that is just part of being gifted.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm really, really grateful. And you don't know how important you've been in our journey. So thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that my son was dealing with that you also talk about in your books is that he was dealing with like these huge explosive feelings. I never related it to him being gifted, and I didn't even think that there was something. Other people would think that there was something wrong with him, quote unquote, but I didn't even see it as there being something wrong, because the emotional way in which he was experiencing the world was not weird to me.
Yeah.
When he was dealing with explosive feelings, he would show it in an explosive manner as well. When I was dealing with explosive feelings, I would basically try and escape in my own world.
Yeah.
It would
Those
still
are different ways that our kids, as they're learning skills, right, to deal with their emotions, kind of deal with the world. And I think we forget or just don't know that thinking intensity, right, that cognitive intensity that we're so used to seeing in giftedness is something that's also exists in their emotional worlds. So we're not just, intense thinkers as gifted humans. We're also intense feelers. We feel everything in this really profound and intense way. And when you're young and you don't have enough maturity to your regulation system yet, or enough ability to manage some of those really big waves of emotion, it's going to come out somehow. So you're either going to fight like your son did, right, and be explosive, or you're going to flee or disassociate like you did.
Absolutely. And one thing that I noticed is that when he was still at home, when he was like 1, 2, 3 years old, it wasn't a problem, because so we were just like really emotional, intense together and enjoying each other's intensity. But once he was 4 years old,
environment at home, you can manage those triggers. You could start to see the kinds of things, the pattern, right? And the things that might trigger him. And you probably managed some of that, whether you realized it or not. And when they get school age, that's a whole new world.
That is a whole new world. And like you're saying, it's like you don't even notice that you're doing it, but you're co-regulating him in a way. And then he just goes to school, and it's a whole different world. And he was in school for only a week, and I was already being called to the principal's office.
Wow.
Saying, your son is too intense, and he's got a mind of his own, and he doesn't listen. He is very smart, so we already giving him work for other years. But he has to adjust. If he doesn't adjust, you should keep him at home, because basically they were saying he's not welcome here. And that really
hard for you as a parent to go through.
It was really, really difficult for us as a parent to go through, because we actually picked that school because we didn't know he was gifted at the time, but we knew that there were certain things that he was advanced in. We didn't realize that. We picked that school because in the stories they were telling us, and the things they were like telling us on their website, they could cognitively give him what he needed.
Right.
And when, within a week, they tell you that there's something wrong with your child, it just shocks you. I remember at first I didn't even really process it, because I'm like, what are you talking about? There's something wrong with, how could there be something wrong with my child? Because, I knew that all the things that he could do and the way he was experiencing the world and the adventurous boy he was. So I was like, there's no way that there's something wrong with my child. And then that was just after a week. And then after 3 weeks, they basically said, he stopped doing his work. He stopped listening. Whenever they would tell him to do his work, he would just sit on the ground. and
Yeah.
do nothing. I was just looking at him and I'm like, well, how do you want him to listen? Because at home, he just listens all the time.
Yeah.
He's a very polite boy. He listens all the time. But the thing that I didn't realize was that I was treating him in a different manner.
Right.
When I was like telling him to listen, I knew that it was important to me whenever someone wanted something done, that I knew it was important for me to understand why.
Right.
So
You
naturally,
explain that to him.
whenever I wanted my son to listen, I would just say, we need this and this and this because,
Right.
and it would be no problem at all, because, all our rules were logical. So whenever we would have rules,
Right. It makes sense out of it all.
he could make sense, and it would just work. So I asked them to do that, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to explain to a 4-year-old what he needs to be doing. He should just listen. So whenever I call him, he should just listen. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen.
Because he's going to have questions about that. And if he doesn't agree, he's going to let you know.
He's going to exactly. That's not going to happen. I mean, it would, when he thinks it's logical, it might happen. But like most of the times, he feels like he's allowed to ask questions whenever he's got any. So
well, and I find your story so interesting, because isn't one of our goals and objectives in education to raise thinking human beings who are able to like problem solve, right? Isn't that considered part of the 21st century skills that we're supposed to be teaching for a different kind of a world and whatever? And then we shut down when kids are like asking questions because we get frustrated with the way in which they ask those questions or show us that they don't understand. I just find the whole thing really ironic.
Yeah, so do I. Before the end of the year, we took him out of that school, and we, found another school that could, better support
his needs.
Yeah. But there was already some damage that had been done by the by the previous school, and emotionally, when things happen that impact him like deeply, he reacts in a strong way that we don't recognize from other children.
Yeah.
So even though he was learning, he was making friends there. He loved his teacher. Still, his teachers didn't know what to do with him. He was getting training in like handling his emotions. Like, they've got this training in the Netherlands that is like the stop, think, do training. Like, whenever something happens and it impacts you emotionally, you stop, you think for a bit, and then you act.
Yeah.
That worked when it was like the really, really small things, like someone took my pencil and I don't want that.
Yeah.
But when it was like the really important things that really impacted him emotionally to an extent that, a couple of hours later, he would still deal with that. That just wouldn't cut it. He would just still explode. Is that something that you recognize and see more often, that kids, once they start school, that those emotions seem to become bigger? And that
I think, yes. Oftentimes that can definitely happen for a few reasons. One, all of a sudden they're in a different environment with different expectations, with people who are not necessarily co-regulating with them. They have exposure to lots of friends and peers who may or may not understand who they are. And so our children, are getting really mixed messages as gifted kids. They're getting these messages that they're fantastic because of all of the things they can do at school. but that they're horrible because they can't regulate their emotions. So they grow up believing that one aspect of who they are as a gifted human is fantastic, but the other aspect of who they are as a gifted human is something to be ashamed of, or something to hide, or something that is really embarrassing, or something that they don't really want to acknowledge. And if we all kind of stopped and thought about it for a minute, why would we ever want somebody to grow up believing that part of who they are is fine, but part of who they are is horrible? And that's basically the message we're giving. From a place of just not understanding that these two things go together. And what that student really needs is some understanding, some education that this is an aspect of what it means to be so bright, and then some strategies so that they can learn how to regulate those emotions, recognize when it's coming on, recognize the impact it's having on others, and then some co-regulation going on within the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're saying one element of like their giftedness is being treasured, like the cognitive element. Or, you know, people were always telling him, "You're so smart and you learn so fast," and in a way that damaged him, because he, you know, that was the level to which he thought he should do, like all the things that he would do in his life.
Had to be this. There was no mediocrity or even just normalcy.
Exactly. He just had to thrive in that respect. But I also love that you're saying that people don't understand that the emotional part is also a part of being gifted. And I didn't know that. So that's what I was like saying in the beginning. Like I knew that the being smart, being analytical, and everything, that was part of being gifted. I didn't know my son was gifted, but I knew, looking at him, that he was advanced, like in those areas. But I didn't know that the emotional intensity was also a part of being gifted. You know, when I was thinking about myself, I knew that I was gifted, and I knew that I was like emotionally intense, but I thought those were two different things.
Right.
I thought, you know, I was gifted and I was a highly sensitive person.
Right. And I think that's the way most people think. I think that's the way kind of the Joe public thinks. I think there isn't a lot of emphasis on the social emotional needs of gifted students, or even just the social emotional characteristics of gifted students. For educators, there's not a lot of education or time given to that. For mental health professionals, for pediatricians to be able to share that knowledge. And so, you know, how are people supposed to know that, right?
True.
Yeah, there's just not a lot of time given to that. I have to say, since the last time we talked, I'm actually kind of encouraged. So I binge watch way too much television. That's probably more than your audience needs to know. But I was up on one of my favorite shows by one of my favorite showrunners or executive producers, Grey's Anatomy. And I love anything Shonda Rhimes touches, I just think is golden. And sure enough, in the middle of this episode that had nothing really to do with giftedness were these scenes about one of the characters' children who was having a panic attack as she tried to do a presentation. And then she wound up taking a couple days off school and spending it with mom at the hospital, and mom got busy with things. And so her aunts were like taking care of her and hanging out with her in one of the skills labs. And there were all these just lying around, all these little kind of visual puzzles, and really, quite frankly, a certain specific type of IQ testing was just like, and she's like building them like crazy. And they're all like, the person who first started with her is like fascinated by how fast she's doing these really complex things, and then goes and gets the other family members to come see, and then finally gets the mom. And they're all have this in-depth conversation about how her panic attack and some of those emotional things that they know this child had been feeling was all attached to that giftedness. And I sat in my chair in complete amazement and immediately tweeted, thank goodness Shonda Rhimes, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm seeing this. There were 2 scenes in a common show, and it gave me hope that, oh my gosh, people are going to start to understand this better now.
It just gives me goosebumps.
Right? That's how I felt. I was in shock. I was so pleased.
Oh my God. And especially this way, because, you know, being gifted in the media, it gets portrayed like far more than it would like 20 years ago.
Right.
But it's always like the mathematical whiz kids who are like so smart and who like finish college at the age of 12 and stuff like that. But this,
and they're nerdy, and they're not necessarily, the emotional piece is presented in a way that kids can't always relate to, as opposed to this kid who had a panic attack on stage, which a lot of people can relate to, and then slowly figuring out that was all connected to something else.
Yes, yes. Seeing that on television makes you realize there's nothing wrong with me.
And what I really loved is that the character was African American, which I found it even more.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was totally, you don't even know, like I'm like screaming from my chair, and my husband's like, what are you doing? What's going on out there? I was so thrilled. I couldn't believe what I was watching.
Oh, I'm going to review this, because one of the campaigns that I'm involved in that we have here in the Netherlands is the Many Faces of Giftedness.
Yes.
Which is a campaign about like,
it's funny you said. So years ago, I did a keynote for the statewide conference in Montana. And as I'm sitting at the Starbucks in the hotel after my keynote, and I'm just reflecting on things, I wanted to start some sort of a Many Faces of Gifted campaign. And in my mind, what I was seeing, you know how they create those great big pictures from a million little pictures?
Yes.
How they do that. I was thinking, like, one of these days I need to just reach out internationally and get pictures of all kinds of different gifted humans, all socioeconomic levels, all, everything, all labels, all whatever, right? And just collect all these pictures and make a really cool, massive picture, like of the globe or of something, for all these faces. And it was called, in my mind, I wrote a whole little sketch about it called The Many Faces of Gifted.
Wow, this is amazing. We should expand this and make this into an international thing. So
yeah, for sure.
For sure. Absolutely.
I just think it's really important, because I think we need to break down those stereotypes, and we need to stop pathologizing some of the aspects of giftedness. That's not to say that we should ignore or not recognize twice exceptionalities, because and kind of those intersectionalities when we're dealing with lots and lots of things at the same time, and the way that impacts us. We can't ignore that. And I think sometimes we do it on both ends, right? We over-identify the disability or the area of need, and we don't identify the giftedness, or the other way around. We chalk up everything we're seeing that's actually indicative of some learning struggles, a learning disability or something, and we say, oh, no, that's all related to giftedness. And so we ignore it on both sides. We don't want to do that. But at the same time, we really need to stop pathologizing some things that are actually normal. It is okay to be emotionally intense. In fact, when we learn how to regulate appropriately, that emotional intensity enables you to be in touch with the world in a way that's super profound, that becomes like a superpower. It enables you to connect in ways that are deep and meaningful and beautiful at a very young age, and kind of make more meaning for yourself, make more meaning of the planet, contribute more, like all of these kinds of things. But because we pathologize it when kids have not yet learned to regulate, that's not what they're growing up believing. Like, they're growing up believing that aspect of self is really bad. And that's the thing we need to really guard against and stop.
Absolutely. I was talking about with a friend about that the other day. We were talking about this deep level of empathy, and that
Oh yeah.
some people thought that that meant that there was something wrong with you, and they would take advantage of you because of that deep level of empathy. And we were just talking about the difference that people who experience this and feel this could make in the world if the world would just allow them to feel the way that they feel. Because I was also thinking about another thing that you were saying, that we pathologize it at a very young age. But if we do that, then we send the message to our children at a very young age that there is something wrong with them.
Yep.
And at a very young age, they learn to ignore a part of themselves that is like really, really valuable.
Yep.
And it is really difficult for them once they start ignoring that to basically get it back.
Yeah. Well, and I think you can get it back, but I think the way you're getting it back, because here's the thing, I think humans are who humans are, right? If you're gifted and you're emotionally intense, you're emotionally intense. You can ignore it, you can pretend it's not there, you can try to throw it in a little box. It's gonna come out. That's who you are. It's gonna come out. But if you grow up believing that that's a problem for you, the way in which it comes out changes.
There you go.
The way
That's the key.
it comes out is it's going to, if you're someone who disassociates, if you're somebody who escapes, it's going to show up as school avoidance, maybe to the point of being an agoraphobic, right? It's going to come out in this really bad way and can, in fact, become the very thing that you don't want, which is a pathologized version of it. That's what's going to happen. And so I think if we can learn that, it's okay to be intense. Being emotionally intense is not the problem. You might be struggling with your coping mechanisms. You brought up empathy, which I think is a great thing to talk about, because empathy, like anything else, lives on a developmental scale. There are versions of it, what I define as immature empathy, in which case it is causing us emotional distress. Yeah. We are taking on the feelings of others to such a degree that we are owning those emotions and becoming those feelings, as opposed to learning how to be there for another, to have compassion for another without owning their feelings, right? It's about boundaries, and it's about really understanding that social awareness of you are an individual with your own thoughts, beliefs, feelings that are 100% valid, regardless of my opinion of them. I am a separate human with my own thoughts, values, and opinions and feelings that should also be respected and valued. And that the trick in life is for me to understand the world from your lens, but to not take on your stuff, to just give you the energy for you to be you. And then your job as a human being is to reciprocate that, to do the same thing for me. And if we all could learn how to do that, wow, what an amazing world we could actually start to live in. We'd start hearing each other. We'd start communicating again. Like, it'd be amazing. And our gifted kids are actually hardwired to learn how to do this, but we have to stop telling them that they're bad and wrong and broken because they feel deeply.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing that we noticed, that the more people were telling him that there was something wrong with him and he should hold in, his feelings and everything, the more he would act like a clown coming into the school building. Like we would not even recognize him. We would leave home and he would just be normal, my loving boy. And the moment he would step into the school, he would turn into a clown.
Yeah.
And, it's like this would just happen. And the clown would turn into the Hulk, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of describing it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I understand that was difficult for him, because why was he changing into the Hulk? Because he was trying to restrict himself so much and not allowing himself to be the person that he actually was, it was almost impossible for him to sustain that for a longer period of time, because you would basically be someone that you were not, and that would take so much of your energy that it would just go wrong. And it would also be difficult for the teachers, because, you know, the clown is difficult to deal with, but the Hulk, I mean,
Even more so.
even more so. So after reading your book, are there any ways in which we can help our children to cope with those intense emotions?
Yes. So I think it starts with having open, honest conversations about this emotional side of who we are. I always recommend that we start with something called an emotional literacy or emotional vocabulary, right?
Yes.
We have to have language to talk about this stuff. Otherwise, we can't talk about it. And we've actually know from research that we can't effectively regulate if we don't have any language associated. If it's just raw feelings, it's actually very hard to regulate from that space. And so I'd start with just open dialogue and emotional conversations, emotional vocabulary. If it's too hard for the child to focus on the child in those conversations, make it about something they've read, something they've watched, whatever they're into in terms of the different fandoms and different things that are out there. You can always talk about it from that third person kind of perspective. You're teaching your child to be an emotional detective.
Yes.
You're looking for the of different emotions and things, but I wouldn't stop there. As part of that emotional literacy, you need to talk about how emotions show up in your body. When you're sad, when you're happy, when you're angry, where does it show up in your body? What's the first clue that you get that your body's starting to feel that? Because sometimes, especially if you dissociate a little bit from your emotions, you don't recognize those early warning signs that you're getting angry or you're getting frustrated or you need time alone, like those kinds of things. We all have early tells or early warning signs for those things. And if you don't know how to recognize them, by the time you realize you need to regulate, you're so far gone, it's really, really hard to bring yourself back to baseline. So one of the things I've really noticed in our, in this later part, post-pandemic kind of world, is that kids don't know where emotions live in their body. They just don't.
No.
Finding it much worse or much more significant than it was prior. And so in addition to words to talk about emotions, it's that physical sensation of emotions and where does it live? Once you have those two things in place, you can really start to develop really good regulation skills. As the adults, we can set up environments that are conducive to kids self-regulating, but we don't want to, as parents in particular, be so good at co-regulating that we're actually regulating for our child and our child isn't learning the skills organically. Like we don't even know it's happening. So we have to be like,
I know. I know. I love that you're saying this. And I also love that you're sharing this tip, because after reading your book, I know that one of the examples that you said in your book was about, creating this emotional vocabulary. And I was like thinking, how can I do this with my child in a way that is fun for him and doesn't make him feel like I'm just want to have tools to fix him, basically. So what we did is I had like all of these images of like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, like showing their emotions. And we actually put them on a paper, and we started to make up like different words for like each emotion that he was like either Mickey or Donald or Pluto or whoever it was betraying. So that was the first step. And I actually noticed that after we did that, there would be two things. He would know like more words to describe how he was feeling, but also putting them on paper allowed those feelings to be there.
Exactly. It made them real, and it made them okay.
Exactly. It made them okay. And then the second step that you were talking about that now was that he still felt like those emotions were real, but like they were happening to him.
Right.
Like he didn't control them, and it would always be like too late.
Yeah.
So what I did, and I think that's also from a tip in your book, I'm not sure, but I'm sure it must be, is we looked at a movie, which is also a Disney movie with all those emotions, you know, with the little red, Inside Out, that's the one, with the little red guy and the little blue guy.
Yep.
And he would identify with the little explosive red guy so much that he could feel the way that emotions would build up in his body by just looking at that animated picture. And that would help him so much, because he could feel, you know, whenever I get angry, my heart starts pounding, my you know, my hands feel sweaty, I feel the blood rising to my head. So that would help him, you know, tell the signs that, you know, he was getting agitated beforehand.
Exactly. Before he turns into the Hulk.
Exactly. And then later on, we even expanded that, because I took a course that actually one of my friends recommended. And he said, you know, what you should do, you should take a course in the polyvagal theory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I said, you know, okay, I looked into it, and I'm like, yeah, that might be a good idea. I think it might help my son. And he was like looking at me and like, yeah, I'm sure it will, but I think it will also, you know, be very beneficial for you as well.
Yeah.
So I took the course, and it has been the most amazing and most important course that I've ever taken in my life.
Absolutely. Somatic experiencing.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, it makes you so aware of how your nervous system basically responds, which like relates to the way that we see the movie and the signs that we notice while watching the movie. And if you know what will help you, on the other hand, to calm down your nervous system, that makes such a difference. And we were talking about co-regulating before, helping him co-regulate, but in a manner that it's not like me regulating him.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, you know, I talk a lot with kids when I give kids assignments when they're working with me. And if it's children who are realizing a lot of physical symptoms from emotional states. One of the things I often have them do is learn how to recognize their own internal stress cycle, because we all have one. It is all slightly different. I mean, there's some commonality, but it's slightly different with everyone. And so what I usually do is I start with kids watching a movie they really enjoy, or like a high action video game, and their homework is to pay attention to what their body does in the action parts, right? Like if it's a video game, at what point are they like clutching the game controller, right? Got white knuckles, like because they're holding it so tight. Or at what point are they holding their breath? Or when are they feeling some sort of stress in their jaw or their shoulders or their neck? And they kind of make a list of kind of what happens first and then what's next and so forth and so on. And then the second part of the assignment is when they're at school and they need to do a presentation or take a test or anything like that. I want them to pay attention and see if they can see any of those same kind of symptoms happen in their body. And then they make a little list of that. And then we kind of merge the two together, and that's their personal stress response. Doesn't matter what the trigger is, this is what your body does when it feels stress, right? When the amygdala starts to fire, this is what your body does. And so then we practice deep breathing techniques, but using them on step one of their escalation. instead of waiting until, any kind of deep breathing would actually look like hyperventilation, because it won't work, because it's too late. And how to kind of regulate when they're at the very early stages. It's just a little bit of discomfort in the jaw, or they notice they were holding their pencil just a little too tight. How to take a really quick mini vacation, or how to do a really quick breathing colors exercise, all of which are in the book. And so those kinds of strategies teach kids that not only are emotions something that don't happen to you, but happen with you, right? But that you actually have some control over some of that. You have some say as to how all of that plays out. And because these are things that live within your personal bubble, your hula hoop, right? These are all things that are 100% you. Nobody else can manage them for you, only you. You have total control over it. So if you don't like how you get really emotionally reactive to things, this is awesome, because the only person who can solve that is actually you.
Yeah. Would it also work, because I know that like one of the other important books that you've written is Healing the Heart, helping your child thrive after
I love that you love that book, by the way.
Yeah. I remember when, I first noticed that it came out.
Yeah.
And I was like texting you, like, when will this be in the Netherlands? Because I absolutely need this book right now, because because it was, first I read your book, and then like a couple of months later, our son was diagnosed with having school trauma. And I'm like, okay, well, I know that from your first book that gifted kids can be more emotionally intense and everything, but how does like trauma impact this? So I'm like, oh, I need to be able to put like one and one together, and
and then lo and behold,
there you were. So yeah, I was like really, really grateful, and also grateful to Amazon, which was the first company to bring their book to me. Actually, just shortly after it was available in the US. So that was really, really good. But one of the reasons that it was important was that at first my son was just having like emotional feelings, but once it became traumatic, because he had not been seen for such a long time, and he was like basically experiencing like chronic stress levels in school,
Toxic
not being able
stress.
not being able to be himself for so long, basically. It became traumatic, but that also resulted in the emotional outbursts not being just quote unquote normal emotional outbursts, but being like fight responses, like coming from a trauma, and they would be like responses that would just be like automatic responses that he would feel like he would have no control over. That when that was happening, no one could reach him, and afterwards he would feel guilty because he felt like he failed. The things that we were talking about before, like knowing how your body reacts and the emotional vocabulary and stuff like that, are those also things that help children?
So yes, they are. I think even more important is a couple of things. When something is happening in the environment, in this case school, and it's gotten to the place where it's the human experiencing it is so their coping system completely shatters, and they're just unable to cope in the environment. That's when we start experiencing toxic levels of stress. That's what a traumatic response is. And the thing that's important to remember is that gets coded. So the last part of our stress response system, any human's stress response system, is a learning piece. It's coding, right? And basically imprinting what worked and didn't work from that situation onto our nervous system, right? And when we do that imprinting, our brain's definition of what works and doesn't work isn't the same as like an outside person's definition. We're not looking at the quality of whether or not we survived. We're only looking at if we survived. That's all the brain cares about in that moment. So if we survive the event, if getting mad, getting angry, turning into the Hulk, flipping a desk, running out of the room, like whatever it may be, resulted in us feeling safe and us feeling better within the environment, then we're going to code that as a success. And it's going to live in our nervous system that anytime something like whatever the precipitating event was happens, we need to do this so that we can achieve safety. And so that pattern of response gets ingrained really quickly and really strong because, again, our brain's number one job above all things is to keep us safe. And our brain in that moment believes that we are not safe within the environment that we're in. And so no rational thought is occurring, no newly learned emotional vocabulary and series of coping strategies are going to be used right then, because those things take more energy to execute than the previously learned flight or fight response that we had. So we're going to divert to the previously learned thing. It's the easiest thing to do in the moment that guarantees our safety. And until we learn to get that through, kind of process it through our nervous system, that's not going to change. It's just not. And so part of what needs to happen is a recognition of triggers. What are the things that trigger this so that you know? And then a systematic way of dealing with it, and then some sort of resolving way that gets us grounded into kind of the present moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the time that it happens, it's like your brain just shuts down.
Like part of your brain that has all this rational thought actually kind of goes offline. And so we're now acting on coded responses that have worked in the past. Now, the beauty is through a part of also a part of our stress response system. It's kind of comes after fight or flight, but before coding. There's a little piece of our stress response system that involves oxytocin, and it really helps us seek out comfort or provide aid to others or try to get aid from others, and it dampens our fear to do that. So it's really kind of a self-preservation part of our stress response cycle. If in that moment, that critical moment, right, we've been triggered and we need something or someone to connect with so that we can help process it down. That doesn't always mean we need to be reliant on somebody else. We can learn how to get that need met internally. But until we learn how to get that need met internally, it's really important sometimes to have some sort of an external something that can help us regulate that piece. And it's a really important piece because when we connect with someone else, that's kind of the foundation pieces of regulation, right? When we're able to connect with somebody else, we actually get increased moments of oxytocin. The more oxytocin we get, it doesn't just make us feel better, which is kind of what oxytocin does from a feeling perspective, but from a physical perspective, that oxytocin actually protects all of our vital organs from the adverse impact of stress. And so we're actually protecting our physical bodies while we're getting kind of happy hits for connecting, and all of that helps us learn that we're safe faster. So the more frequently we can provide that kind of support to somebody who's kind of lost it, so that they can quickly kind of de-escalate and start to regulate, you don't even try to teach something new during that time. And we have to reduce language, and we have to be there through physical presence or through presence over the phone, as opposed to trying to talk at people because they're not really understanding what we're saying in that moment anyways. And so there's just a whole methodologies that we can adapt around that to help facilitate when people kind of have lost their front part of their brain.
Yeah. And I wish that would be like more known, like also in the education system, that
Yeah.
people know that they can play a role
Yeah.
in like co-regulation with children. And I love that you're talking about the oxytocin, because I remember when my son was like in first and second grade, whenever he would feel like his emotions would build up, what he would do is he would start hugging the teacher or someone close to him. But people would respond like, that's not normal, that's not allowed, you're not allowed to touch the children are not allowed to touch the teacher. So that would be perceived as something wrong. And I didn't really like it as a parent much either, that a lot of like other adults would be like touching and hugging my child. But afterwards, I would realize that he would instinctively know that that hug generating oxytocin is what he would need.
Well, the oxytocin happened, which made him want the hug. And then he got the hug, which gave him more oxytocin.
Exactly. But that would help him downregulate.
Yep. And then it's just a matter of teaching kids, because we do live in a world that's less safe than it used to be, right? And so we don't want our kids hugging random strangers, and we don't want educators blending lines that are potentially problematic. So there are ways to teach kids how to get that self-regulation. Maybe I'm holding their hand and giving a squeeze to the hand so they get a little proprioceptive, input from it. I have a collection of stuffed animals that my kids no longer want, that I launder regularly, because, we live in flu season right now. So, that stays super clean in my office, but they're there in case somebody needs a dose of oxytocin, because I'm very much I'm introverted anyway, so I tend to be a little bit more standoffish. My nervous system is easily dysregulated, so I always have to kind of guard that. But if somebody needs a handheld or something like that, I can certainly provide support that way. And adults can learn how to just provide energetic support, so that you're not actually physically touching at all. That was one of the things that I actually did agree with, that a lot of people had concerns about during our COVID situation and whatnot, is, oh my gosh, when people are masked or they're participating in learning online, they're not having those connections, none of this will work. And I actually don't fully agree with that. I think there's ways that you can energetically be there for each other, whether you are on Zoom calls or whatever, or whether you are face-to-face, all of which are really valuable. I think there's absolutely ways you can do it. Yes, there's some breakdown when masks are not available, because there's some visual facial signs that we're not getting, and there's some learning through that we're not getting. So by no means am I saying that that's ideal, but it doesn't have to be damaging. And I think the myth a lot of people bought into is, oh my gosh, we're damaging kids, we're going to be feeling this for years, like our kids are broken forever, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that has to be true. Some of my deepest, closest relationships with humans are some humans I've never once met in person. I know them online. I know them in a really intimate way because we share books, or we share each other's writing, which is a very personal kind of a thing. My writing friends, people I've known for years and literally have never met them once in person. And when I finally meet them in person, I'm always amazed, because it's like I feel like I've known this person that, the better part of my life. And so I know from that, there's no reason, if you know how to be present in the moment and you know how to energetically be there for one another, and you've developed some empathy skills, that you're going to miss out on any of that. So there's lots and lots of ways in which we can be there for each other when they are in crisis, that still keep our physical bodies safe, that still allow those of us who have, nervous systems, who might be introverted and have nervous systems that are easily dysregulated, that can still manage all of that. I think we just have to get out of our heads a little bit with some of this and realize that there's, human beings are fabulously adaptive, actually. And there's lots of good ways we can do this.
Absolutely. That is really amazing. And I share your experiences as well, also with people that I've known online, and then I finally meet them, and it's like I've known them for ages.
Exactly.
You were talking about sometimes you don't have to touch your kids, but just energetically you can be there for him, and that would help a lot, especially if we would combine it with, Temple Grandin.
Yep.
Based on her ideas, people created like this jacket. They use it for
The
people with
sensory.
autism. Yeah, as well. And he could just like use a pump to
It's just
to
trying to
make
get
sure.
some proprioceptive input. You can
Exactly.
hug yourself, you can tap, bilateral beats. Like there's all kinds of ways you can do this.
Exactly. And if you would combine that sensory input with just the energetic input of the people being there for you, no matter if it was like in real life or via Zoom or
over the phone.
Over the phone, that doesn't matter. If you would combine that, that would help him downregulate as well. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah.
I've already asked a lot of people that I've done podcasts with and webinars with. I was reading all of these books about giftedness and twice exceptionality that you were also talking about before. And especially when there's also trauma involved, it gets really difficult to make the distinction between, like, for example, what is the part that belongs to him being gifted and what is the part that might or might not be twice exceptional. It got me thinking and asking the question over and over again, could we consider like PTSD plus giftedness as a form of twice exceptionality, and should we treat it as such?
Absolutely, we could. So twice exceptionality just means I'm gifted. So I'm a gifted human. I'm neurologically gifted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have fill in the blank, whatever the fill in the blank is, right?
Yeah.
And so any of our mental health conditions, of which PTSD is one, absolutely would fit that bill. Any of our learning disabilities would fit that bill. Other neurological conditions, autism, ADHD, etc., would fit that bill, right? And so it's really, I think what's important to decipher is what characteristics are happening, what things are happening that are happening to such a degree that it's disruptive to my daily routine. I cannot function every day. And once I recognize the giftedness, which is always where I would start, and I've met those needs. So I'm getting opportunities to accelerate my learning. I'm getting opportunities to really dive into things that are really important to me. I'm having open, honest conversations about all of the things it means to be gifted. When all those things are happening and I'm still struggling, I still can't pay attention. I can't turn in a piece of homework to save my soul. I have freak out moments that are regular enough that and big enough that the things that used to work aren't working anymore. Those are all telltale signs that you're gifted and.
Yeah. And you're saying something really important. You're saying, start with the gifted needs. And if we meet those needs and there's still something left, then that's what we should look into as well.
Exactly. And that could be an indication of a twice exceptionality.
Exactly. But what I find in like healthcare and stuff is because being gifted is not like a diagnosis. We treat the problem and we don't treat the non-problem, which is we acknowledge that a child is gifted, but we also have a diagnosis of like autism or ADHD or PTSD, or doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, but that's what we focus our attention on.
Right.
And we forget about being gifted, either because we're used to focusing on the problem, or because we think, that gifted part is just a plus. It's a beneficial thing and not something that we should like pay attention to. Right. Is that something that you also see like in practice in schools and in your practice as well?
Yes. Yeah. We're really at finding the problem, and we're not always really good because we don't have such a good understanding of giftedness. I know
Mhm.
that there is quite a bit of research out there that says, quite simply, if we deal with the disability, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
we deal with that, but we do not take care of the giftedness, we're actually creating more harm than if we did
Mhm.
nothing at all.
Yeah.
And so I think I am a strengths-based practitioner first and foremost, always, and regardless of whether I'm dealing with an actually gifted kid or not, I'm always looking at this from the lens of a strength anyway. So if I'm dealing with a student, for example, who has some attention difficulties, we're going to look at this from a strengths perspective. If I have a student who's got some behavioral difficulties, we're going to look at what are this child's strengths, and are they overusing their strengths in such a way that it's now become no longer a strength for them, like in actuality, right? And so, I'm always looking at it from a slightly different lens anyways, because I think if we can just accept humans as humans, in whatever version they come to us as in that moment, and we stop trying to make it they are broken because they are showing up in their authentic self, whatever that is. I think that's where we make the mistake. And so I'm bent that way anyways, but the research also bears it out that we need to deal with the giftedness and support the giftedness first, see what resolves as a result of that, and then see what's left. And what's left is starting to point us, it's our indicators that there's probably a twice exceptionality going on. If we have a gifted student who just isn't learning to read, guess what? They're probably gifted and dyslexic. There's no reason why you can't be both. If we have a gifted human who, like I mentioned before, no matter what we do, cannot get the homework turned in, sit down on the carpet square, no matter what, right? No matter how we've helped them, whatever it is, it's entirely possible that we're dealing with a gifted kid who also has an attention problem.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
We are Venn diagrams. We've never fit conveniently into boxes. We're never gonna fit conveniently into boxes. We're messy, we're nuanced, and we're Venn diagrams. So we just need to all just accept that and kind of move from there.
Absolutely. And isn't it lovely that we don't fit in?
Right? It's a wonderful world because we are.
If you don't look at the gifted needs, but you only look at what is wrong and you focus on that first, if you don't include the being gifted in the treatment of the other things as well, I mean, for us, it wasn't going to work.
Right. And it doesn't for most people.
Exactly. And because it didn't work, what happens if a child is like in therapy for like 5 years and nothing works? What happens? A child is going to think, there is something wrong with me.
I'm so broken that a therapist can't even figure it out. Wow.
Exactly that. That's exactly what happened. Mom, dad, I am different to anyone I know. Nothing helps, so I might as well just disappear. This is something that I'm trying to pay more attention to, like even in podcasts that I do and in articles that I write, so that people in the fields, like people in healthcare, people in the educational system, that they know.
Yes. Look at the whole child. That's really what it comes to.
That's what it comes down to. Yeah.
We are not a series of parts. And in human beings, the sum is always greater than its parts. And so you have to look at us as whole, unique entities and all that may mean first.
Exactly. Yeah. Christine, I would really like to thank you for having another opportunity to record this podcast. Is there anything else that you would still like to share with people listening?
I'm so thankful that the work has meaning for people. That's the whole reason I did it. I'm working on a 3rd edition now of emotional gifted students. So I'm super excited to bring that forward. There'll be more mention of things like somatic practices and some of those strategies and that aren't in the second edition. And so I'm super excited to bring that forward. Hopefully if I can get my act together and actually get it turned into my editor. And then after that, I don't know. I don't know what I want to write next. I've had several people kind of email me of late just with, hey, what about writing on this? Or what about writing on that? So for any of your listeners, if there's something that you really want to book on and you can't find one, let me know. You never know. It might be a project I decide to take up.
Exactly. I know how valuable your books can be. So if they have any suggestions, it would be really, really good if they would email you. We'll just push you a little bit because I think that the third edition would be really valuable for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm actually really excited to get it out. I was nervous there for a little while, but now I see it coming together, so I'm feeling better about it.
Good. Good. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Dit was weer een aflevering van Een Intense Reis, de podcast. Fijn dat je luisterde. Heb je naar aanleiding van deze aflevering behoefte aan hulp of begeleiding? Via www.eenintensereis.nl help ik je graag verder. Op deze site vind je ook meer informatie over mijn boek Een Intense Reis.
Luister je graag naar deze podcast? Laat de maker weten dat je waardeert wat hij of zij doet en geef een digitale fooi. Dat kan zonder abonnement, snel en simpel via fooiepot.com. Fooiepot met een d.com